and one of them with ADHD and currently seeking intervention through the public healthcare system. And he found himself walking the talk when his youngest child displayed signs of special needs at age 4. And both he and his wife are constantly looking for opportunities to engage their children in meaningful ways. And he shares his journey with his kids in his Instagram at the doting_dad. And finally, we have Jesse, who is an adult ADHD himself and father of 3 ADHD children. So this is hashtag welcome to the chaos. So he had undiagnosed ADHD for years, but sought medical treatment because of aging and his child's ADHD. So today he's a church planting pastor and Bible conference speaker, and also a retired tech entrepreneur. And today he volunteers as well at Unlocking ADHD in strategy and community engagement. So he considers ADHD as something that has helped him. And his ADHD abilities include strategic thinking, creative problem solving, leading through crisis and changes, and mentoring, developing the potential of others. So this is a very quick introduction. I don't think it does justice to our psychologists and panelists. So we will let them share more about their stories a little bit as we move into our next segment. So our next segment will be, I will not be sharing my screen anymore, right? So our next segment will be a fireside chat, and I will be moderating the session and asking questions and directing them to our psychologists as well as our panelists. And let's keep this something lighthearted and vulnerable. And I hope everyone enjoy the session with us today. So I'm going to start with Sean, right? So yes. The first question that I have is, before we dive in, can you give us a brief overview of ADHD in children and adults and some of the common misconceptions and myths?
Sure. I'll try to do a very condensed version of that. But I want to thank you first for the very kind introduction. Good evening, everyone. So I think most of you have probably heard about ADHD prior to coming for this webinar. But for those who are still not very certain what it means, just want to give you a very brief, condensed, introduction on ADHD. So ADHD is actually a neurodevelopmental disorder affecting 11% of school-age children. The symptoms can actually continue to adulthood in more than 3/4 of cases. ADHD is characterized by developmentally inappropriate levels of inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. Now, one of the common misconceptions about individuals with ADHD, whether it's children, adolescents, or adult, is that many people perceive them as not being successful. So that is a misconception. Individuals with the diagnosis can be successful in life, but however, without identification and proper treatment, right, ADHD may have serious consequences, including trouble keeping up with school academic performance, family stress, disruptions, as well as other co-occurring mental health issues like depression, anxiety, problems in interpersonal relationships, delinquency, even accidental injuries and job failure. Typically, ADHD symptoms arise in early childhood. According to the DSM-5, the most current version of our mental health diagnosis Bible, several symptoms are required to be present before the age of 12. Many parents report excessive motor activity during toddler years, but ADHD symptoms can be hard to distinguish from the impulsivity, inattentiveness, and active behavior that is typical for children under the age of 4. Now, in making a diagnosis for ADHD, children should have 6 or more symptoms of this disorder present. For adolescents 17 or older and adults, they should have at least 5 of symptoms present. So there are 3 subtypes for ADHD diagnosis. One is the ADHD predominantly inattentive presentation. The other one is the ADHD predominantly hyperactive impulsive presentation. And the third one is the ADHD combined presentation. Now, currently for the DSM-5, it requires professional diagnosing ADHD to include the severity of the disorder. And this is, classified as either mild, moderate, or severe. Now, children with ADHD often experience delays in independent functioning and may behave younger than their peers. And many young children affected by ADHD can also have mild delays in language, motor skills, social development that are not part of ADHD, but they often co-occur. They tend to have low frustration tolerance, difficulty controlling their emotions, and often experience mood swings. Some of the at-risk, behaviors that they might face include, academic, difficulties, struggle with peer relationship issues, getting into risky, behavior, or at-risk stuff like sexualized behavior as well. And other issues that we might come across for young persons with ADHD will include opposition defiant disorder, conduct disorder in older teens, as well as eating disorders for girls. So with regards to causes for ADHD, currently, no studies have been able to determine the exact cause of ADHD, but, scientists have found a strong genetic link, and it runs in families, okay? With regards to assessing and diagnosing ADHD, I just want to highlight that there is no single test to diagnose ADHD. It requires a comprehensive evaluation that is necessary to establish diagnosis, rule out other causes, and determine the presence or absence of coexisting conditions. Such an evaluation also requires a lot of time and effort, and it should include a very careful history and clinical assessments of the individual's academic, social, emotional function, and developmental history. So this would require, the child or the parent or the caregiver to fill out a series of, behavior rating scales, checklists, interviews with, parents, caregivers, school teachers, even partners of spouses who are suspected of having ADHD as well, before the diagnosis can be, ascertained. So with regards to treatment, right, there is usually a comprehensive approach to that. It includes parent-child education about the diagnosis and treatment, parent training in behavior management techniques, medication, working closely with various schools and school programming and supports, and in some cases, right, or in most cases, right, requiring child and family therapy. I'm not going to speak too much about medication tonight, but I'm just going to highlight a bit about, behavior interventions. This plays a major component in the treatment of children with ADHD, right? Some strategies might include things like using positive reinforcement, teaching problem-solving skills, communication, self-advocacy skills. I've been working with parents and young children and teenagers a lot in helping them to learn self-regulation, co-regulation, executive function skills coaching, right?
And here we are back again. So apologize, having another ADHD moment there again. And by the way, I forgot to mention that I myself have ADHD. A quick introduction. At age 39, I got diagnosed at age 37. And then it was struggles through work that made me seek a diagnosis. And since the diagnosis, it has been a very enlightening past 2 years, and also a giant relief that finally there's something that I can deal with instead of a monster that I cannot feel. So I have another question for Sean. From as a psychologist and from your point of view, what is a successful father's role in ADHD child? From a child developmental as well as family relationship point of view.
Right, that's a very good question, Yuan. So I, want to say that fathers of children with ADHD have a special calling to stand with the children during times of emotional and behavioral difficulties. They play a very significant role in giving the children hope and courage, and providing them with opportunities to define themselves by their strengths rather than just their weaknesses alone. So to do this, I think it requires a lot of parenting and reparenting as well, and teaching them, skills where how they can actually, co-regulate with the children when the children, have meltdowns as such.
Okay, now I get it. So thank you for your sharing. So perhaps it's time to have our fathers share a little bit more about their own journeys as well as their stories. So I'm going to go to Prashant to kick off. So Prashant, I don't think I did a very good introduction for you just now. So I believe you can share about your stories, about yourself, and
absolutely
your child as well.
No, absolutely. No. So thank you for having me here. And thank you, audience, for coming in and taking out time up to listen to us. Primarily, no prizes for guessing. I was born in India and I came to Singapore in 2006 to study at the NUS. And I have since, for the past 10 years, I've been investing and scaling in small startups and scaling them up. Run about 3 companies in about 16 countries. So typical ADHD person all over the place, multiple places. So that's what my professional journey is about. As far as my family is concerned, I have twin daughters, one of whom has been struggling with major depression for the past 2.5 years. So I've been a caregiver as well. And that drove me into kind of initially being a student at the Caregivers Alliance course, the CAL course, for 12 weeks. And then I liked it so much that I basically went in and actually trained myself to be a caregiver trainer myself. So I'm a volunteer trainer at Caregivers Alliance. And that introduced me to the whole world of mental health in terms of how difficult, challenging, and debilitating it can be to deal with issues like that. Now, when it comes to ADHD, I've been at ADHD and hyperactive for as far back as I can remember, going all the way back to my school days. But back then we didn't have a name called ADHD, so we had no idea what it was. But most people, the usual feedback I would get from my class teachers was like, very talkative, can do better. So those kind of things, like always interrupting, and so kind of those kind of things. And of course, I was always like inattentive, going from here to there, and studying like 3-4 subjects at the same time. So very, very, very chaotic and kind of study environment for me. But having said that, ADHD comes with its own pluses as far as I'm concerned. So I was blessed with a very high IQ. So basically, my IQ kind of pulled me through, and I managed to kind of get good grades all through my school. And that was one reason why my ADHD was very masked. People did not believe that I was ADHD. I was attention deficit because I was scoring so well in my school. But then what happened is that later on, as I started growing up and I started realizing the secondary issues coming out of it, and I was having difficulty managing relationships and having difficulty in being a better father or a good father at all. So I said, there was something wrong. And so what I did was, I went back to a psychiatrist. I got diagnosed formally in 2016. And basically, but I did nothing much around it. The psychiatrist prescribed medication. But having said that, I didn't take that medication and I just resorted to meditation. So, okay, maybe that's going to solve my problem. So I was trying to meditate, which was a torture in itself for anybody with ADHD, right? So it did not help. So finally in 2020, I said like it was overdue, and I kind of delved deeper into what are the options for me, and seemed like medication was the only option. So since then, I sought professional help, sought therapists, started taking medication, and of course things have improved since then, and I'm much more structured, much more deliberate in what I do now, rather than being very impulsive. Of course, those things are not going away, but I would say that I'm definitely much better than where I was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So that's my story.
Okay. I picked up on a few items, things like you yourself being having diagnosis later, and also assisting your child as well. So we have a few questions during the registration about adults being ADHD themselves and trying to help their child with ADHD, and they can't even figure out how to help themselves in the first place. So we'll circle back to that later, as well as a little bit on the meditation that you were speaking. So this one I will come back to you, Sean, as well, for some of your opinions on meditation later as well, okay? And then next we will go to David. So please share about your story.
Hello everyone, I'm David here. I'm a father to two children. My youngest, who is 8 years old today. Today is his birthday, and he was diagnosed with ADHD a couple of years back. And how it got started was that at 4 years old, he started to show symptoms of school refusal, right? And when we checked with the childcare teacher, we realized that he has been constantly punished. Stand at the corner, don't talk so much, and so on and so forth. We were naturally very unhappy because the teacher did not engage us, and so we started to observe him a little bit closer. And we found that at various checkpoints, various different type of activities, he seemed to be exhibiting, behaviors that are actually not quite the same as the kids that are around him. So, for example, cycling, for example, other kids can just pedal and go, but he has issues regulating his emotion, and he's easily distracted, so on and so forth. Our difficulty was that, because he was 4 years old, so which part of it is the little boy and which part of it is the question mark? Yeah. So that's when my wife and we decided that we should perhaps get him diagnosed. A little bit about me, I work quite a bit with youths and children. So, and in my course of work, I have come across children with special needs, and I've always advised the parents to send them for diagnosis. If nothing else, at least to rule it out. All right, so that we can know how to help the child. So lo and behold, I found that I have to walk the talk, and have to really send my child for diagnosis. And true enough, he was diagnosed with slight ASD first, because they can't diagnose ADHD until he turned 7. But along the way, the psychiatrist that we were working with already suspected, very high suspicion that he has ADHD. So by the time he turned 7, it didn't take very long for him to be diagnosed with ADHD, and he was subsequently put on medication with our blessing, because I have seen firsthand how medication has helped children. Right. So our whole idea is basically to know how to help him, and eventually to equip and to empower him, basically to help himself. So I'm still very much at a very early stage in journeying with my son in ADHD, which is why I'm part of the reason why I'm here also, to learn from all these dads, how to manage, how to inspire my son, and hopefully to give back as well. All right, so that's me checking in.
All right, thank you, David, and happy birthday to your son as well. And I will now invite Jesse to share about your story. Take it away, Jesse. You gotta unmute yourself, bro. ADHD moments.
No, you hit the thing and then the window popped up. So
sorry about that.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, I'm just gonna try to talk before my medication wears out. No, I'm Jesse. I have ADHD. Was diagnosed last year at the age of 56. So most of my life, for over half a century, even though I suspected I had ADHD, I was just never diagnosed. And we grew up in a generation where there was no such thing as ADHD. You're either naughty or a troublemaker, and you get spanked or get kicked out of school or something like that, right? Or get kicked out of the classroom. So So I was kind of that way. Only difference was this: I somehow went through school and never got caught because I masked my ADHD symptoms. Just figured out that there were certain things I just need to restrain myself from doing. It turns out I think I'm supposedly very high functioning. So I was able to restrain myself in the classroom most of the time and also at home. So nobody found out except when I'm alone or with close friends or after school or on the school bus when I was as wild and crazy as anything. I was always up to something. And at home, I was always doing all sorts of backyard science experiments, playing with fire, trying to blow things up, and so on and so forth. So a lot of that risk-taking behavior, but also risk management, which actually naturally led me eventually into exploring, experimenting with things. So I got into computers. And that actually helped me a lot with my ADHD. Right, programming, writing code. It helped me put in all the mental scaffolding, the mental discipline to be able to cope and to deal with some of my problems actually. And over time I've stopped making careless mistakes in my math, right? And I'm the one catching mistakes, being proactive about all that kind of stuff. But as an adult, it led me into entrepreneurship. So I was in R&D, started tech companies and software, helped lead a .com company to an IPO. And then I retired and then became a pastor. And right now I'm in a startup situation now. We're planting a new church. So the thing was this, growing up in that way, a lot of these things seem normal, right? And then when you become a father, and raising up kids. Now, I did not know that of the four children that we have, 3 have ADHD, and the other one actually was born with a genetic condition, so which is life-threatening. Now, so they grew up with me. They know their dad as being a little slightly on the crazy side. My kids were homeschooled, so it gave them a lot of the structure and regulation that actually ADHDers needed. But a side effect of that was it delayed the diagnosis. And being, as a father with ADHD, I saw a lot of the little manifestations of ADHD as just being perfectly normal or acceptable. So what led to this was it was actually when my daughters had finished their high school, they're preparing for university entry, that I started to see that my eldest, who's usually she's bright, she's brilliant, very innovative, very creative, struggle. And the big thing was procrastination. There were a lot of papers that she had to research and write and all that. And she did well, right? But both my daughters did very well. And they were able to get into university. But for my eldest, it seemed to have taken her more time than it should. And so we had this going back and forth. Now, my ADHD, I have hyperactivity, and it's more mental than physical, although when I was younger, I was a lot more physically hyperactive. And my eldest, she has inattentivity. And so, strangely enough, you would think that, having ADHD, you would be able to understand. But because we were on the opposite sides of the spectrum, we were butting heads quite a number of times. I couldn't understand why, even though, yes, it may be natural to face certain things, certain obstacles and whatever, the inability to overcome that was something I could not understand. Now, it was in her first year in university that she said that I would like to get assessed and, tested for ADHD. I said, fine, go ahead. If you think this is a problem, I don't understand a lot of it at the time. I support you. Go ahead, right? So she went through this route. It was a kind of long, convoluted route, and finally, she actually it wasn't going anywhere. So she finally went private, and was assessed and was diagnosed with ADHD. And now, in that few months that she was going through this and taking medication, now that was when she came back to me and said, "Dad, I think you should go." So I was like, "Okay," I suspected I had ADHD, but it didn't seem to be something that was like really messing up my life or whatever. I am known to have certain quirks and to work in a particular way or whatever. but it wasn't something that was crippling. So I did take it that seriously. But she said, if you get assessed, what's it going to hurt if, let's say, even if you do a 2 or 3 week, medical trial? I was like, being the ADHD I am, I'm always open to trying something new. And of course, thinking as an engineer, it's like, okay, let's diagnose this. Either I have it or I don't. I can rule this out and then problem solve. Or if there is a problem, then we move on from there. So anyway, I went in. Now I was diagnosed with mild ADHD, very high functioning. Was not regarded as something serious, but it so happened that in the coming month or more, I had actually cleared my schedule to work on some projects. And the whole idea was to avoid distractions. But I found that the more generous the time schedule was, and the more generous the deadline was, the harder it was to actually get things done. Now, I had always been very good at nailing things down at the last minute or whatever, or doing an all-nighter, the greater the time pressure, the calmer I was and the more focused I could be. And, I had no problems with nailing things that way. Now, that was when I realized something is wrong, because it brought back all the memories of the last 40 years, the things that I have been dealing with, and realizing that all this time, especially as an adult, my best working hours were from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. Okay, not 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. And I could deal with that. But having to function as a father, as an adult, working adult during the daylight hours, now I was never at my best. And I knew what the peak of my performance was. Now, it may have impressed people. People were happy. It was always above average, but I always knew deep down, this is far short of what I could do. Right. So fast forward, I decided again. I went back in. I said, maybe it's time for me to do something about this. So I did the trial, and then I realized, wow, what a difference it made, because now I was able to function from the 9 a.m. to the 9 p.m. slot. Right. And while going back and forth with my daughter, my eldest, we sat, over at the dinner table discussing some of the things, what we were going through, what we were experiencing. Now, my second daughter came up to me and said, Dad, I've been listening to all you guys have been saying. And she said, I've been hiding this for a long time because I thought this was normal. And then she said, I think I have ADHD. And, I realized that she had been struggling with a number of things. So that was how she and my youngest son eventually were diagnosed. And so since then, of course, all of us are on different forms of medication and, with different dosage levels and all that. But it's been a very, very interesting journey. And for us, it's been a mix, right, of both very powerful strengths that ADHD has given to us versus, especially for my kids, I think there were things that were kind of very crippling for them, but which were never really a serious problem in my case, right? But that helped open my perspective and my understanding of all this, right? And so at least now we're better able to work with them and to help them through this journey.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for sharing. There were also a few points that we will be circling back to talk about as well. But there were a few points that were quite interesting because your story of it seems to be quite common, especially for parents that their children got diagnosed with ADHD. And then they look at the symptoms, and then they look at the signs, and they think, this sounds like me. And they seek the diagnosis as well. So I'm going to direct this question to Sean. Just now you mentioned a little bit about there is a hereditary related aspect when it comes to ADHD, right? So, how related are those? And do we commonly see this in between parents and a child with ADHD?
So that's an interesting question. So usually when I have a child in the office with me, parents will bring the child in because of concerns of inattentiveness, impulsivity. And then when I kind of like do the detailed, history and gather more information from the child, of course, like, with a child sitting in front of you, the child's not going to tell you everything that you want to know about this child, right? So, you have to do separate interviews with the parents and caregivers. And so when I ask questions about, like, if they, the parents themselves, have come across similar sort of presentations, when they're younger, that's when they might kind of ring the bell and say, like, you know what, I also have observed that I have similar, patterns of behavior as well, when they're much younger. So that's why we might have that discussion about, whether they themselves need to be, assessed, for ADHD. So sometimes it works from the child back to the parents and to maybe their uncles, their aunts, as well. So then we kind of draw that link and say, like, well, am I running a family?
I see. Yeah. After I got my diagnosis, I could see where it came from, from which side of my parents is coming from. And then I started noticing, that's what my grandmother has been doing. It doesn't seem very logical at that point of time, but now that I think of it, yeah, I'm not very logical as well most of the time.
Yeah. And interestingly, sometimes, that might not be the referral question or concern that brings this child or teenager to me in the office. It could be due to, like, this young person has, got himself involved in some sort of like at-risk, behavior and got into trouble with the law. Right. And then, looking back at the school history, because often when we work with, such cases, forensic cases, we have to, do a very comprehensive interview with the child's school history, conduct in school, interview the parents, the teachers as well, to get as much information as possible. And then, the checklist and behavior ratings. And then that's when kind of like ring the bell that, this child might have, ADHD. And then often when that happens, I'll get the child referred back to the psychiatrist again to do, further, evaluation workup. And then, lo and behold, sometimes, the child may be put on trial for medication. And then, reports from parents that there are significant improvements in other areas of domains of the functioning as well, like improvement in attentiveness, relationships have improved, when their attention improve as well. Sometimes I get that, the appraisals from teachers have improved significantly, when they are put on trial medication.
Okay, that's good to hear. And then I'm going to go back to the fathers. This is both for yourself if you have ADHD. David doesn't have, but it's mostly for Prashan and Jessie, and as well as for your children. So all of you mentioned a little bit about the treatment that you have gone through, and as well as your child have gone through. So can you elaborate a little bit more about the treatments and what were your thought processes when it comes to deciding what kind of treatment that yourself and also your children have received and are receiving now, and what kind of benefits or improvements that you have observed? Because we see a lot of parents, they struggle, should we consider medication for the children, or themselves, and whether they should go for other kinds of therapy or behavioral training classes and whatnot. So perhaps, so I'm going to put forth this question to David first, and then after that, maybe to Jessie, and then Prashant as well from your caregivers training experience too. Okay.
When it comes to treatment, okay, I was just going to answer this. There was one question in there that talks about, also one person was asking about the 8-year-old and how does medication help. Actually, for professionally, like I mentioned, I work with children. So I have seen right before my eyes, really how medication has helped the child. And when it comes to my own child, we see it as the start of a journey with him. All right. it is not a cure. And because of his age, he's still growing. They do take his weight and his height to calibrate the dosage, and it does help him to be able to manage his emotions a bit better. And when we do check in with his teachers, they do see a different side of him. All right, he's a little bit more focused. He's able to manage his emotions better. But it's not only the medication, if I may add. It is the whole experience of getting him diagnosed, because medication is only part of the journey. The other part of it, which is even more important, are the strategies and the therapy that comes with it. And that is the part that, as caregivers, as parents, as his network of support, we are able to help him. Because after all, he's still a child. He's 7 years old, 8 years old. He goes to school. He gets into squabbles and stuff like that. So we're able to help him to process things like that. And then with the help that the psychiatrists and the therapists give us, then we are able to empower him. Yeah. So medication is, while it's important, it is just the first step, and it's just the start of the journey. But it's actually the whole package that comes along with that. Yeah.
Okay, and then Jesse.
Okay, for my children, they started with medication. Now, I started off actually being a skeptic, right, when it came to medication. But personally, I think going through the trial myself, knowing what it did for me, even though mine is considered mild, just seeing the before and after what, the benefits now, I realized there were quality of life issues. And while in many cases, our children could be doing well in school, they could be performing, it's coming at a cost. All right. And I saw that with my daughter, my eldest, and with myself. What led me to seek diagnosis in the first place was realizing that I was depending on a huge amount of adrenaline surge in my body to be able to get through and to get things done. Plus, of course, a lot of tea, right? But internally, it was causing a lot of problems. My heart was skipping beats. Now, my daughter was going through even more serious problems than that. I'm not going to elaborate on all the details, but she was nailing paper after paper, doing well. But think of it as this way. You're doing well, you're functioning for all intents and purposes to everybody outside. You're fine, but you're bleeding internally. Emotionally, mentally, it's coming at a cost. And so, with the medication and each of my kids, they were on what they were using was different. The way we use medication is also different because of the inattentive ADHD. Now, my daughter needed the more of a powerful kick in the morning to get started because of executive dysfunction. I had no problem getting started on anything, right? But it was not, for me, it was regulating so that I don't initiate too many things and over multitask. But for my daughter was initiate, getting started. Once she can get started, then things could move smoothly. So figuring out, I think how all their brains worked, what worked for them, and why, how, where, and where they need the help was important. So as things progress, learning to know when to be medicated and when not to be medicated also was important, which is why these days I do advocate, at least spending a number of weeks, understanding your ADHD through taking medication, because then you know the difference. You also know what works for you, because there are times that it will be an advantage. It will be your special power, right? Provided it can be maybe, you can wield sufficient control. But at other times, you don't want it, right? So we, my kids, we were learning when we need it, when we don't. Example, my second daughter, she found that with the right dosage levels, she was fluent. Otherwise, she's very quiet. She's as quiet as a mouse, right? But with the right dosage, she's fluent. She can speak during a presentation, right? I need a little bit of it in order to not to, say too much, and then to kind of stay focused on the topic. So our brains work differently, and it was, I think parents can, if we understand ADHD, I think we can start to understand how our children, they function, what are their strengths, and what are the unique things about their brains, and then to manage how to use the medication. So the psychiatrist is just going to say, okay, take 10 mg. All right. You're going to have to figure out when to take it, what works best for you, how much or how little to take. Okay. And that's going to take a bit of testing.
Yeah. So I hear what you say. Medication is different for everyone, and it takes a little bit of work to figure out, what the doctors usually call this as a medication trial, and to take note using a medication journaling to understand the correct dosage for everyone. So I'm going to pass the question to Prashant. I can repeat it again if you want to. if not, take it away.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I agree with David and Jesse and what they have said in terms of brains working differently. I'll tell you my story. Although I was diagnosed in 2016, I was aware of it since 2011, so I didn't even go and bother to take a diagnosis until 5 years later in 2016. And even when I was diagnosed, I started medication only in 2020. I was very apprehensive about the side effects of the medication, and I was very protective around whatever was actually being whatever which could affect my brain, and so I was very protective about it. I said, like, I'm happy with whatever state I am, but I don't want to have any side effects. But eventually I came to the realization that medication is the only way. There is no other way, as far as I am concerned. So that's my kind of conclusion from it, that medication in different dosage or form, but it is possibly the only way to get started. Now, again, having said that, medication is not the only recourse you can have. It is one of the things that you actually have. So medication will help you kind of calm down a little bit and bring you down into ground realities. But on top of it, I also do a few other things that are within my control. So number one is, of course, sometimes I will go in for therapy when I have my lows, and the ADHD has made me like very depressive, or so to say. I would go in and take a therapy session here and there, but I'm not very big on therapy as far as ADHD is concerned. But I do some things. For example, now I have trained my mind to set up a filter between my mouth and my brain. So I am not as impulsive as I used to be. So I don't blurt out things which may be politically incorrect, which may be hurtful or condescending, or to other people. So I'm very, when an idea or some words come into my brain, I just let them sit on it and not blurt it out immediately. So medication helps me build that filter, like that level of control that gives me a leash on where my mouth should open. So that is one thing which I do. Second is, again, for example, there are other things that you can do. I use an app. It's called Freedom, and of course, I don't benefit in as far as the app is concerned, but I use. There are multiple apps available now, which I set up on my phone, and there are no distractions on my phone or my laptop for basically 12 hours during the day. So I can block all the distractions, whatever the news and social media and everything else, I can block off. So that is something that you can actually do. It doesn't require any medication for you to kind of trigger off. I also, set up deadlines in terms of like, and when I set up a deadline, like Jesse mentioned that, the more generous you have a deadline, the more difficult it is to get the job done. So I will set up a not so generous deadline, maybe a realistic deadline. But the different thing I do the additional thing I do is I tell everybody that this is my deadline. So everybody in my organization knows that I'm going to deliver this by this time. So then it becomes like a public shame if I don't deliver, right? So that builds a pressure on me to say, okay, boss, now tomorrow you have to do this, whether you have to do all nighter, whether you have to do whatever it is, you have to get it done now. So this way, at least I am able to get things done. And the fourth thing which I am aware of is I'm now very aware after the whole reading and diagnosis and everything, I'm very well aware of my strengths and weaknesses. I know my strengths. I'm very good at many things, but I know that I will never be good at things which require detail, orientation, or many other things. And when I'm aware of it, first thing I say no to tasks which are primarily will require these kind of things, and I will not be able to do it. If somebody tells me, okay, read a 30-page report and give me a summary by tomorrow morning, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to be able to do it. So why say yes? I will always hire people to do that. So I hire people to do stuff which I am absolutely aware that I will not be able to do. And so these are some of the things which go beyond medication in a day-to-day life, which you can just implement around, whether it is you or your child or anybody else. Just the simple things to kind of build a structure or a framework around in which the person can function. So that's my 2 cents on it. As far as medication is concerned, I personally feel there's no escaping it. And then again, but supplement the medication with some of these different things that you can actually do easily.
Yeah, that's a very, very balanced way of looking at things, and I have the same thought process as well. When it comes to both medication as well as other things, I call it my personal SOP. So make it very easy to operate, and so get people to be accountable. Tell everyone our deadline, so there's no escaping. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
And then Jesse, you have something to add? You have 30 seconds to say something before I want to direct it to Sean.
Or maybe I go first before I lose my train of thought.
Yeah, Sean, yes.
I just want to kind of add on to that note when Prashant was sharing about blurting things out, and controlling that. Sometimes in the office, right, of course, we're not going to observe all this behavior when a child's sitting with you in the office, right? So what I usually do is I get the parents to kind of observe, right? Let's say if a child notice okay, this person that looks, heinous or something and wanted, to say something, but the child's able to hold back that impulse to say it, and then only wait till the child gets into the car, right, and tell the parent, did you see that person? Like what she looks like? That would be a perfect moment for the parent to actually, work with the child. How did you do that? How did you, what did you do what do you talk to yourself to hold back the impulse of blurting out something and embarrassing, that person? So we want to catch that behavior, right, and reinforce that behavior. So holding about, some of the things like what Prashant was saying that, is beyond medication, right? There's a lot of behavior modifications and reinforcement and behavior shaping. So when a child does that, right, quick praise, encouragement, advice, that the child is able to hold back the impulse to blurt out something that's inappropriate in that situation, right? So we get the child to rehearse that as frequently as possible.
Okay, yeah, that's a good add-on to what Prashant has mentioned. And Jesse, you wanted to also add on?
I just wanted to, I think, mention it's not necessary to go with the strategy of trying to get rid of the ADHD, right? Eradication is not necessarily a good thing if it removes your special strengths and abilities. Now, in other words, I don't take the meds in order to kind of be able to be a better version of myself, right? People were already coming to me to seek unique solutions, that problem solved and all that, by tapping on my ADHD, right? So to try to be so-called normal by being very well medicated is a downgrade, right? Now, is the unregulated ADHD that's the problem. And so being able to wield the ADHD properly such that it helps you rather than it gets in your way, I think that's the important part. So helping our children to figure out how to do that, where the strengths are. Example, when they want to be creative, they may not want to be on the medication at that time, okay, because it does kind of hinder that. Okay, yeah.
So this I think this brings up a very a good segue into what I wanted to ask. We prepared some questions, but I think this one is something that I have to ask all the fathers here, as well as to Sean as well. because many people, even ADHDers themselves and parents of ADHD children, because of the struggle and the pain that everyone is going through, we don't see this diamond of strength and also ability that ADHDers have, innate abilities and strength. And I want to ask all of you, what are some of the strength and the beauty that you see in your ADHD child, that you don't really see in other children, that you can grow and nurture further. So I'm going to start with maybe David first.
Oh, okay.
I caught you by surprise.
Yeah. I'm actually taking down notes as Jesse and Prasan and all that. So yeah. Okay, so one particular symptom for ADHDers, I think, is hyper focus. So he is when he gets into that mode, my goodness, he transformed his Lego set into things that are truly exceptional. We come home and then I know we kind of leave him to do his thing, and then and we go and run errands and all that. When we come home, he can just come up with things that are like totally I actually, to be honest, I was actually I'm not a big Lego fan, because while I grew up with the old kind of Lego, I always find that Lego has progressed into something a little bit less creative these days, because a lot of the shapes are all pre-designed. So, but even then, he is able to come up with something new. So that's really great, all right? And also when we are driving, he's able to see a lot of things very, very fast. So that's the part of him that I really appreciate, and I'm actually still working on how to harness that kind of energy, that kind of positivity from him, and importantly, to spread that message to his teachers, because the teachers are the people that see him for 7-8 hours a day. So this is the other part of being a parent that has to come in, and that is to be active advocate for your children. To be that mouthpiece for them. Not to spoil them or pamper them, but you have to be the one that actually talks about their strength, right? Because the rest of them, chances of them catching on to their strength may be a bit slim, because in the context of a classroom, there are 30-40 other kids, so I can understand that constraint. So yeah, so that's from me.
I wanted to add to that, one of the strengths that I come across with, in individuals with ADHD is creativity, right? Those with ADHD or ADHDers are often very creative individuals, especially when they're given a specific goal-oriented task. Some of these kids I work with, teenagers I work with, they can be so creative in what they do. So we can channel and harness, that sort of difficulties into a strength for them. So another thing I come across is spontaneity as well, right? They can really, take on, a task, spontaneously in an unplanned moment. So to highlight that, these are some of the strengths that they have and how they can use it best to their advantage, that could be really, really useful.
Yeah, Dr. Hallowell said it the best. He said that what is creativity but distractibility that is put to good use? And if there's no distractibility and there's no spontaneity, there's no creative spark, right? So how about you, Jesse? What do you see the strength of your ADHD daughter? And then we'll move to Prashant.
Well, one of the things I think was the ability to actually work very well under pressure. Very tight deadlines, and hyper focus. And with my kids, I think computer gaming actually revealed that. I realized my son, for instance, did not have an attention problem. He could game very well, right? So it was a question of what he felt was deserving of his attention. The problem-solving ability, the creativity, again, served them very well. And my son was coming up with all sorts of things with Lego also. My daughter was able to have powers of observation, noticing things that people ordinarily would not observe, and that turned out worked very well in English lit. For instance, if you're reading a book or text or a poem, and then she's making observations about things that, for instance, the professor is saying, "Oh, I didn't see it that way." Oh, very good, interesting insight, right? And that translates into writing good papers. So these things all can translate into, again, in the workplace eventually, as an analyst, and whatever, where you are making observations and you're coming up with a strategy or solution as a result. I think being an ADHD father, one of the things that I think it helps is that we can foster an environment at home that is very accepting of people who don't fit the mold, don't fit into typical definitions, and yet helping everyone to not to be afraid to explore those areas of strengths and to maybe cultivate that into something that they could actually use as they grow up. Yeah, Ian?
Yep. That's a good point there. I just wanted to highlight what you mentioned just now about the creative problem solving. That's what all the corporate companies are requesting, right? We want you to think outside of the box. But to an ADHDer, what box? The box never existed. We've always been thinking like that, right? And then the observation and insight, that is something that I myself also noticed in myself. And then it comes from what I think it is that because we don't filter all the sensory data that come into our brain, everything catches our attention, So we don't have an attention deficit, but we have a problem with managing the attention to everything. And because we can notice everything all at once, we can deal with a lot of data and complexity, and also, come up with creative solutions with very, very unique observations and insights, right?
Yeah.
And then I want to pass it to Prashant. What do you see are some of the strengths that you see in your child?
I mean, the strengths in me, I don't know about my children, but at least I can tell you about me in terms of my strengths. If God ever gave me an option in my next life, I would still want to be born with ADHD rather than without it. So basically, I've had my unique set of strengths. So problem is the thing that I want to highlight very clearly is that we have a different set of strengths and weaknesses, but we are not disabled. We are not handicapped. We have a different set of strengths and weaknesses. Like every human being on this planet has. I haven't seen a perfect person anyway, right? So, but we have our own set of strengths and weaknesses. So for example, many ADHDers I've seen have very extremely high IQs. They're super smart. It takes them 10 minutes to understand what it would take somebody else an hour to go through stuff. So it is something which possibly gives you an advantage, whether it's in academics or anywhere else. Like the very high IQs. Number two, if you were to look at most ADHDers are very good at multitasking. And they're very good at multitasking. I can play chess with four different people at the same time. So it's something which other people will find it hard to do. But it becomes very, very naturally to me. So that is another one. Third part is most people like ADHD, they're all novelty seeking because they're impulsive, right? They are impulsive. They're doing different things all the time. So because we are novelty seeking all the time, and I have been like this all through my life, like jumping from one thing to the other like 20 times in a day, I end up having a treasure trove of experiences which otherwise I will never have. Right. So basically, somebody asked in the chat that, why do some of the ADHDers actually become super achievers or they're so successful? This is the reason. High IQ, novelty seeking, treasure trove of experiences, good at multitasking. And because they are impulsive, they're also risk takers. And that's what entrepreneurship is about, right? You take risks and you get rewarded.
Yes.
Yeah. But the only challenge what happens is that, when the society or everybody around you, and David mentioned very, very correctly here, in the home as well, when the society and the home environment, where they try to fit in the square pegs in a round hole, we are not people who can be fit into a round hole. That's the only problem. If that problem goes away and you get diagnosed, of course. So basically, if you come across, let's say you are able to fly, right? So God gave you this nature has given you a gift that you're able to fly. Okay, you can fly, but again, you have to have your own set of brakes and you have to have set of controls. So the only challenge happens is that if diagnosed early, it can become your strength.
True.
And that's what exactly JC is saying. And I would and agree with David as well there.
Yes, I would agree. And there's something that you mentioned just now about the novelty seeking in ADHD. I see a lot of parents as well as ADHDers. They are asking about how can they make their child do something, pay attention and whatnot. The challenge is, if as a parent or as a teacher or as for ourselves, we can figure out what excites us and turn the thing that is boring into something that is interesting and exciting for us or for your child. That ADHD person will not have a problem focusing and paying attention because it's interest. And I read this somewhere very interesting that person mentioned that the neurotypical brain, the normal brain, is a priority-based system. So things get prioritized properly. And the ADHD brain is an interest-based system. And we do things based on interest level. So use this. It's a different way of mentally processing the world that normal person and an ADHD brain has. And it doesn't have any correlation to whether they are better or worse. It's just a different way of thinking. And as Prashant, you mentioned very good, well, if we cannot find ways to manage and also leverage on the strength, they're just all buried under layers upon layers of chaos and pain and struggle, right? So all the strengths are buried. We don't see them. So I'm glad that all of you shared some of the strengths. And I want to circle back maybe a little bit on something that caught me a little bit just now.
Okay, Ian, can I just jump in for a few seconds? Just to add on to, I think, what Prashant is saying, right? The thing is, this multitasking now, some of those of us who have kids, I think who have ADHD and myself also, it happens in the classroom. Okay, I used to multitask because things were simply too slow. Okay, and the problem is, that sometimes what's going on may be, my kid's not paying attention now. Sometimes it may not be that it's just not difficult enough, it's not challenging enough, or it's not dangerous enough, to warrant that level of attention. And many times I would get through the class simply because, I was playing a chess game under my table while reading a book, while writing code all over my textbook, all at the same time while the class is going on. And occasionally I would still take a few seconds to daydream, by staring out the window. And that was a survival strategy. Otherwise, I probably would be just running out of the classroom altogether. And so sometimes it may be that things are not difficult enough, and that's why, they're tuning out. And so we may be sometimes trying to approach the problem from the wrong angle. And you may have someone who's actually very bright, but who's not finding things challenging enough to bother.
Okay. So I want to move into another set of questions. What was I thinking about just now? See, I have working.
I was trying to buy some time for you to think about things.
Because there were so many questions I really of you guys, and they are all burning questions that came from the parents, from the ADHD, and from myself. Okay.
Forgetfulness.
I'm going to go with this one. For what do you see your role as a father being playing a slightly different role compared to mothers in helping a child with ADHD? Because a lot of fathers tend to underestimate their roles, and also there are also many guys who will take a step back and say, "Yep, that's the mom's job," right? So I'm going to ask the parents, the fathers here first. What do you see yourself, your role as a father in nurturing your child with ADHD? And then I'm going to go to Sean to probably add on a little bit and some commentaries. Let's start with Prashant.
Yeah, sure. So basically, first thing is, the role of a father is not to be a roadblock. The reason I say this is basically because I come across so many instances where, and not only ADHD but other mental health conditions, where the mother says, I'm convinced that he has this condition, or he or she, or the child has this condition. but the father is not agreeing that this is a condition. The father is saying that I'm being overproductive. The father doesn't want to go to the psychiatrist, or the father doesn't want to allow him to take medication. So I think one part is that, for fathers, and because again, at the end of the day, we are in an Asian society, and kind of fathers seem to have a slightly upper hand when it comes to decision making in the house. I would say that first thing the fathers can do is basically not be the roadblock. Number one. Number two, of course, go in and be more accepting of these kind of conditions. Find out a little bit more, and kind of start on the process, on the recovery process, or at least on the healing process, like what needs to be done, medication, how else you can be supportive, and create an environment, like Jesse mentioned, like the environment in the house is going to be absolutely crucial. And if you don't, if one thing that you can do is basically just be very cooperative, collaborative with the mother and everybody else in the family, to create a very cooperative and enabling environment inside in the household. And I think that will do a world of good, not only to yourself, but also to your loved ones.
Jesse?
Understanding that our kids are not adults, they have their limitations, right? And that means what brings with it, I think, compassion. Be a problem solver, help them to work through the issues. I think it does take us also putting our own pride out of the way, because I see this in parents. A lot of times they see any imperfection in the child as something that wounds or hurts them in terms of their competence as a parent. And, problems exist. We don't live in a perfect world, right? And so we've tried to foster a problem-solving mindset, in everything at home, and one of the things I see that's very missing is, many are needing a father to lead, all right? And so be a mentor and a leader, to them. And if that includes, you being the one to mentor them in their ADHD, now, the best way to do this is when a parent knows how to manage their ADHD for better and for to harness the strengths and to mitigate the problem areas. Now, they are the best mentor for a child with ADHD, right? So many times, I urge the parents, if you have not or you've suspected, go get yourself assessed, get diagnosed, find out more, learn about your ADHD, because you are probably the best person who can guide and coach your own child, right? And they need you. So do that.
Yep. And David?
If you can just sidetrack for a bit, one of the reasons why I love being on this forum and being part of Unlocking ADHD, and all that, is to really hear from parents like Jesse and Prasad and those who have ADHD themselves. Because sometimes the struggle I have is that I want to think like my child. I want to help him. I want to step into his mind just for that split second and to see how to help him. So it's been quite precious. Okay, so for me as a dad, so this is the thing that I struggle with. Yeah, I honestly don't know how to help him, and I rely a lot on a professional consultation and reading books. But on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week basis, since he is 6, 7, 8 years old, I find that my role is very traditional in the sense of bringing him out, exposing him to a lot of activities, so that it can be a platform for him to firstly discover his talents and find that confidence in it. And secondly, which is the most important, these are platforms for me to affirm and to praise him. Because I know that the world out there is very cruel. All right, his friends are unkind. People are just too busy for him. So that is one way I try to help him to advocate for himself by putting positive thoughts into him. And it's not a very pretentious thing. It's but creating opportunities to praise him. So I hope to be able to put that into his mind, into his heart, from as young as possible, and from there I hope that we are able to leverage on this to strengthen our bond as father and son.
Yeah. I think I hear what all of you say, especially David, that I think as fathers, all of you don't want to overly praise your child, even if they didn't really do anything special, correct? You want the praise and the criticism or the feedback to be in line with the things that they have done. If something deserving praise, then praise accordingly. And if something that deserves to be disciplined, then you put in the necessary discipline and the boundaries accordingly, correct? So I'm going to ask Sean to also add on to this and provide the commentaries.
Yeah, so before I answer your question directly, I just want to make a comment about gender stereotyping. I think we have come a long way. We are increasingly seeing more fathers now playing the role of what traditionally mothers do, right? We're seeing more fathers stay at home now, being the caregiver, and moms going out to work full time. So we're seeing that shift. But that said, right, I mean, fathers still continue to play a huge, significant, real positive male model for the children. It helps, fathers, really helps to promote, reinforce good behaviors. So we know from some research studies that has shown that, children with more involved fathers, they tend to have fewer behavioral and impulse control problems, longer attention spans, and higher level of sociability. So these children who comes from families with more father involvement, they also show more compassion and generosity, increased awareness of the needs and rights of others. So another important thing to take note as well, why fathers play a huge role, is that, children are naturally full of questions. They're curious individuals, right? And we know that children will not naturally go to the mothers for all the questions. So fathers can come in a huge way to provide different perspectives on, certain issues that the child might bring up, questions that the child might raise, right? And fathers can provide, in that way, the fathers can provide a wider way of exposing, their children to a broader range of thinking about, these issues that they brought up and how they go about problem solving as well. So I just want to say that fathers are invaluable to the child's development.
So fathers, do not underestimate your roles and that you play in the child, especially for an ADHD child, because ADHD is a paradox of extremes. We either do really well or we don't do well at all, terribly. So if the father's role is not there to ensure that it goes through the good side, it's going to be extremely bad instead of going towards extremely good, correct? And I have a few thoughts myself, and then I see that a lot of the questions coming in, as well as the question that came in from the registrations as well. I'm going to compile them, and I'm going to throw this question out to all our panelists and to all our fathers here, and to Sean as our psychologist as well. I based on my own observations, is that generally the very basic good parenting practices, things like collaborative problem solving, healthy boundaries, proper disciplining, positive affirmation, and all this. These are things that work for all children, and I think they also work really, really well with ADHD child as well. So what do you think about using the basic good parenting best practices on ADHD children? So maybe start with Prashant again.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, as I said, number one is, they have to be made aware that there are certain things that they will not be able to do, and so kind of build a framework or a structure around it. So that is number one. So in terms of the parenting techniques, but build a structure around. Okay, fine. Mostly whatever is not safe, don't curtail everything out of it, because that's the whole point of having ADHD, right? Then we are able to experience so many different things. So don't take out everything. Just maybe take out something which is not safe. But other than that, just allow them to be free and easy and go around and experiment what they have to do when it comes to comes to that part. So they should have the freedom to go out, explore. Number two is, I think, be a little patient with them, because sometimes they will come back and give you times when they will they will fail, or they will possibly not would have done very well in terms of their exams or anything else. So just be patient with them. Just give them some rope, give them some leash, that okay, in the end it's going to eventually work out. So those are two things I would possibly see as a good parent, in terms of parenting tips, being allowed to do so.
Okay, thank you, Prashant. Jesse, and then we go to David, and then maybe end with Sean. I think we have about 5 to 6 minutes
Okay.
left.
Okay. Well, actually, proper child discipline and training did work for us. It helped them in terms of learning restraint. It allowed us to correct behavior. Of course, being an ADHD father, I think I'm still there to provide sufficient latitude for them to, some free play, and not to hover. We didn't believe in hovering over our children, but we wanted them to be able to learn from consequences also, if need be, as long as they are not life-threatening, crippling, and and have long-term consequences, right? But we, in observing the children, understanding them, for instance, with my daughters, one was very smart and brilliant, but would not be considered hardworking by many. And then the other one was very, very hardworking. Now, we had to tailor, I think, how we work with each of them. And turns out, the one who was very persistent and consistent in the work could more than make up for a lot of things, right? So we had to kind of just consider each of our children as individuals, rather than just as cut out from the same cookie cutter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. And David?
Actually, as a parent, the basis is still the same, like what Jesse was mentioning, discipline and so on and so forth. In fact, one interesting phenomenon for us is that we tell our boy that he has ADHD and he needs to take his pills and all that. And there was a point in time where he started to use his ADHD-ness as an excuse. Right? So he will say, I have ADHD, what? So I'm like that. Say, no, no. You are still expected to be honest, hardworking, put in your best, and basically behave, finish your work and so on. In fact, and we are here to help him. So it's no different. But what we do is that we are conscious that in our conversation with him, that we are telling him that we are here to help you, and you're not to use this as an excuse. Yeah. So while we are journeying with him to discover his strength. Yeah.
Yeah. I hear you. ADHD is an explanation, but it is not an excuse, right? And children are very unique in that they live up to the standards we hold them to. If we hold them to a higher standard, they will live to meet that high standard. If you put a low bar for your child, oh man, they are going to live to meet that low bar. And then that's a very sad thing to think about, right? So Prashant, you want to say something, and then we pass it over.
Yeah. Very quickly, when you're going to be like setting up a high bar, or when you're going to be kind of putting a framework around them in terms of disciplining, my only advice is try and be selective. Like, don't try and discipline them about every single thing, because there is something which is known as oppositional defiance disorder. I will do only if it comes out of my own volition. If you tell me to do something, not to do something, I make sure that I will do it. Right. So this is most ADHD people. So I have to do stuff which is kind of a rebel. So there's a rebel inside us. So I would say that, if things are, like you said, David said and Jesse said, if they're not life threatening. So somebody in the chat mentioned, like, for example, eating tissue paper or eating chalk. I've done that half my life. Like, when I was a student, I used to eat tissue, paper in my class, like I throw my copies, and I have eaten it. I've eaten chalk, the teacher chalk, which they used to write. I've eaten many of these. I survived and I lived, and it's not the end of the world, right? So, but and I'm saying that, of course, I'm not saying a little jokingly, but I'm saying, if you try to be like discipline them for every single thing, then you're going to lose them. So you need to loosen up the noose a little bit and be very selective about like what you kind of teach them and discipline them for. And think about, create a framework in your mind. Like, I'm going to teach them about only things which are supremely important. If it is not super important, that's fine. Let it go.
Good point. Good point. And before we go to Sean, I'm going to, we are near the end, so I'm going to put up the feedback in the Zoom poll. So kindly answer feedback. It's just 4 questions only. And in the meantime, Sean, yes, please take it away. What was the question just now that I was asking?
Okay, so I just want to kind of highlight 2 more things. So one thing is about, maladaptive behavior or misbehavior, right? So every misbehavior or maladaptive behavior that you observe is usually a choice. It's a reflection of the need of what a child is attempting to get his needs met. But this child is actually using a lose-lose assertion. So when we want to try and correct the behavior or the misbehavior, right, we want to kind of like guide the child to use a win-win assertion. So again, choosing approaches that are developmentally appropriate for the child or for the teenager. When it comes to disciplining a child, especially someone with ADHD, that can be very complicated. And we have to be mindful about not letting our emotions get in the way, right, when we try to address the misbehavior or any other sorts of social improprieties. So the more we become emotionally consumed, right, by the child's behavior, the more likely we are going to use ineffective and inappropriate strategies such as hitting, screaming, threatening, bullying, withdrawing love and attention, and those are not healthy. So just to kind of like, summarize, don't let the emotions lead the way, right, to how you want to go about addressing that behavior that is dysfunctional and not serving a good purpose for that child.
So this is also where most fathers would come in to be as what Jesse mentioned just now, as the problem solver. Just be neutral, come in without too much emotions, and deal with the current problems and work through it collaboratively. Correct? Yeah.
So don't label the child. Address the behavior. Right. So if a child steals, don't call the child a thief. Right. If a child is not motivated to do homework, don't label the child as being lazy. Right. Because then that the child internalize those unhealthy messages, and it's not good.
Yep. I feel that when you say lazy, that was my label for 37 years before I got diagnosis. And during my therapy session with therapist, oh man, I cried like a baby trying to work through that label. It was so difficult and painful. And then another friend shared his story that he accidentally called his son useless one time. His 8-year-old son repeated this word for months. I'm useless, I'm useless, I'm useless. Don't say things and label them until they give up life, give up improving, and give up growing. Because once the hopelessness is in, it takes a long time.
Yeah, it does affect the child's self-esteem, right, and competency as well. So,
I personally think a label like this is worse than the label of ADHD, because this label is internalized, but ADHD is something that I can fix, right? And then I think we have come to the end and the conclusion of our session. I want to thank all of you for sharing so generously and providing clinical experience. And we have Prashant with his caregiver trainers experience as well, and David seeing it real life in the education sector, and Jesse coming from a family of a lot of ADHDers, as well as being a very successful entrepreneur himself too in the past. So before we end, I'd just like to do a quick plug. All right, I'm sharing my screen right now. Again, we will be having a Tamil language webinar in conjunction with our first Tamil microsite on ADHD in Unlocking ADHD. So this is the sign up link. And as well as come join us in our social media, and especially in our Facebook support group here, right? If you look for us in Facebook, you will find our main page, and within the main page, there is a support group. So do register and answer the questions to join our support group. And Unlocking ADHD, being a very young organization, is currently being run by blood, sweat, and tears of the volunteers. And we would appreciate and welcome any donations. You know what? Your donations will be paying it forward to help us further our efforts in serving the ADHD community. I personally am volunteering as much as I can to pay it forward as well, because of the road that I've gone through. And the same that Prashant and Jesse and David and Sean is doing right now. They're also paying it forward, right? So with that, I think we can end our session today. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for being
Good
here.
night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.